You got it. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you, of course, for making the time to attend this presentation. I know that 9:30 in the morning is considered early for academics, but of course, also great thanks to our speaker, Prof. C. Song, who is staying up actually to give this presentation. It is 9:30, I understand, at where she is. Yeah. So thank you for spending the evening with us, C. Now, let me say a few words before I get the speaker to start. Prof. Song is Associate Professor of Sociology and Demography at the University of Pennsylvania, where she studies the topic of social inequalities. Yeah, so as sociologists, we are very interested in that. Uses a range of statistical, demographic, and computational techniques to understand social inequality patterns over time. Yeah. She holds a PhD in sociology as well as a master's in statistics, both from UCLA, as well as an MPhil from HKUST. She has a very impressive academic record of winning awards, and I'll just say a few of them. The 2021 William Julius Wilson Early Career Award from the American Sociological Association, no less. Her publications have also received multiple awards from such as the ASA, the ISA, the IPUMS, as well as demographic research. Today, she shares with us a very interesting topic, talking about the contrast between perceived and actual inequalities, looking at the China context and the Chinese situation. So I've asked her to speak for there about 30 minutes, 35 minutes maybe, and then we devote the rest of the time to Q&A, right, which is also a very interesting part of the session itself. So without further ado, can we invite Prof. Song? See?
Thank you so much for this very generous introduction. It's my great pleasure to meet colleagues from CFPR and share with you my research. Let me share my screen. Let's see. So I guess I prepared more slides, or I may have to go a little bit fast in order to finish the presentation within 30 minutes. I don't know how this works. I'm happy to take questions, particularly clarification questions, as I talk through the slides, and we can save, open-ended or questions that require more time for answering to the end. So how this works, Vincent?
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just start. I changed the title a little bit. So now the new title is Understanding Subjective Inequality in China. This is because there are two papers. Probably many of you know the authors. One is Professor Yu Xie from Princeton University, another is Shang Zhou from Harvard University. So they published papers on rising inequality in today's China. So particularly the first one is highly cited on understanding inequality in China. So I think there are many other studies motivated by this paper to discuss how inequality has changed since China's market reform. But there is relatively little research on subjective inequality or people's perception of inequality. But even just regarding China's inequality for many people living in the US, so there is a lot of discussions about inequality in US or in Europe, but many people do not know that China's income inequality not only surpasses that of the US by a large margin, but also ranks among the highest in the world. So for this study, I want to know, well, whether Chinese people themselves are aware of this trend and whether they underestimate or overestimate the real trend of rising inequality in recent decades. So in the sociological literature, people's objective and subjective understandings of social inequality or other social phenomena do not always coincide. And why there is often disparity between these two is often like a black box. So for the literature, typically people try to understand this either from a social psychological perspective, in which they assume that individuals' perceptions or attitudes or opinions are shaped by their prior knowledge or their experience or their own social characteristics, such as their education or race or religion, as well as prior beliefs and our ideology. But from a social structural perspective, so our people's perceptions are also shaped by their exposure to mass communication, be it print media or broadcast media, or just the personal influences. And one very influential study is by our Eliu and our Laddersfield in the 1950s, in which they argue that our opinion leader play a very important role in transmitting, news or opinions from media, particularly our print media back in the 1950s to the public. And nowadays, we know, particularly because of the rise of social media, there are many online celebrities or the big Vs. So those are the new opinion leaders who help to shape individuals' perceptions. Okay, so the research question for this study is very simple. So I want to understand how rising inequality is perceived, publicized, and understood in the largest non-democratic, some people may call this even authoritarian regime in the world. And in particular, there is a lot of discussion about the political roots or the institutional roots of rising social inequality, tracing back to the classic work by Seymour Martin Lipset and more recently by Mike Held, who argue that rising inequality is not an economic inevitability. It doesn't mean that economic development always bring rising inequality, but it's more like a political decision, whether political leaders or public leaders, they decided to allow or disallow the growth of inequality. So here I want to apply the same logic to see whether it's also valid to explain perceptive inequality, not the real life inequality. And on the other hand, I want to test whether media plays a role in shaping Chinese people's perceptions of inequality as an effective tool used by the government for, our public opinion control. So there are a few studies recently by Gary King, who is a political scientist at Harvard, who studied Chinese government's control over news media. And his argument is that the scale and the sophistication of Chinese government's control over news media are unprecedented in humans' history. So many of you probably know there are so many different types of propaganda apparatus and censorship used by Chinese government, say the internet, our water army, the 水军, the 50 cents parties, our self-censorship, our name verification, or legal restrictions. So for all those, seems the Chinese government has developed those and deployed those tools for mass media surveillance that is more complicated than what we have observed in many other countries. So here I offer this diagram to show my analytical strategy. So I want to test, the first is the hypothesis about our media representation, in which I hypothesize that the media coverage of inequality news is associated with the degree of state control. And in particular, I want to understand how different types of inequality news are distributed in different types of media, from more, media under stronger media state control to those under weaker state control. And the second hypothesis tests the relationship between mass media and perceived inequality, in which I want to understand for people with different media use behaviors. So for comparing those who use more traditional media versus more, social media, whether they also have different perceptions of current rising inequality in China. So media will be the key component that links the real inequality and the subjective inequality. So here I try to provide some background information about our marketization of the print media in China. So as you can see that since the 1949 to around 1980, almost all the media in China are state-owned, which means that the supervising work unit is called the 主管单位, and the sponsoring work unit, the 主办单位, are both government agencies. So since the market reform, we see there is a dramatic increase in the number of newspapers, as well as our marketized newspapers. Many are previously state-owned newspapers. So now we see more media groups, the 报业集团, which makes the media become more commercialized. So here I introduce a spectrum, which includes on the very left-hand side the state-owned media, and particularly the party mouthpiece, like the People's Daily, 人民日报, which under the strongest state control, followed by marketized media, and then digital media, which only published online, to social media. And for more recent years, we even see those individualized media, such as the WeChat, those personal account. But for the data here, I included those covered before 2018. So include 4 major types of media, varying by the degrees of state control. Okay, so here the data comes from our Chinese newspapers, from our China's 知网 and 万方, our database. So I used our inequality as a key word to search newspapers from the 92 major newspapers, to search all the newspaper articles. And if inequality is being mentioned, then I included those articles into my database, as well as our inequality articles from digital media, such as the paper, FT Chinese, and the Guancha.com. And I also include our social media big Vs, those online internet celebrities with verified names. And for those big Vs, if they ever posted a Weibo mentioning our inequality, so they will be included in my database, which include more than 5,000 posts that mentioned inequality. So as you see, this is just not a very traditional database. It's more like the text data, which I'm going to show you later, how we will use this to analyze the distribution of inequality news. So this is just to show you the 92 newspapers included in the database as we are for the sake of time. So I'm happy to later come back to this if you have questions about newspapers being included. But overall, I try to include, like our People's Daily, the most state-controlled newspapers as compared to some of the, say, the Nanfang are somewhere in the
Sorry, Prof. Song.
Daily.
I think we have a question, a clarification question from Hu Su. Hu Su,
Yeah.
do you want to very quickly pose your question before we proceed with the rest of
I
the
think once I started to share this,
Yeah.
I cannot see the chat box. So if someone can read the question for me.
Hu Su, can I invite you to just pose your question directly?
Sure. You mean I post my question in the chat?
To the speaker now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hi,
now.
Dr. Song. It's a very simple clarification question about an earlier slide. So in the first slide you have shown, I noticed that in the later years, the earlier one, number 9. There's a category called non-existent. And if you look at the right top corner, there's these white stripes. If you could explain a bit there. Thank you.
Yeah, so just some of the newspapers were terminated or later banned, or they are probably they are not making enough profit, so they no longer exist. Okay, well, thank you for this question. So I will just go to give you some examples. So this is an article published by the People's Daily on August 6, in 2017. It's very interesting to see how such parties' mouthpiece report inequality in China as compared to in the US. So overall, it says that, well, I don't know, some of you probably cannot read Chinese, so I just do a very quick translation. So in this article, it reports that, well, for the top 1% richest families in the United States, their wealth account for 1/3 of the whole wealth in the United States. And the next 9% families account for another 1%. So overall, it portrays the United States as a very unequal society. And then to the other hand, it compares the US with China, particularly the targeted poverty alleviation program in China, and argues that, well, between 2013 to 2016, the poverty population in China's rural areas has reduced by more than 55 million, and the poverty rate decreased from 2012 to 10.2% to only 4.5% in 2016. So it's a big change. And then it argues that particularly, well, the Gini coefficient has dropped, the income gap has narrowed, and the middle income group has grown steadily. and in particular, the economic development and rural-urban residents, their income all have achieved a big growth. And then this is another article published several months later in Wall Street CN.com, which is not related to the Wall Street Journal somehow, but it's a very popular digital media online. So it says the tax increases the income gap in China. So this the Song Xiaowu, who is the director of the China's Income Distribution Research Institute, in one of his talk, he mentioned that, well, wealth inequality has already become one of the most serious problem globally, and this is not only for other countries, but also for China, and particularly this is comparing the before tax and after tax income distribution. And he argues that the post-tax income distribution even widens income distribution in China. And for the richest 500 people in China, they account for 80,000, how many? This billion wealth, as compared to only for the two, I don't know how to translate, 0.27 billion rural migrant workers in China. Their total income is just slightly higher than that. And then there is a social media post. It's an overseas returnee lamented China's academic corruption has reached the level of units. Schools, a place for imparting knowledge, turned out to be a profitable business. Jobs for college graduates are unequal as well. If you have no guanxi or friends in high places, it's not easy. Moreover, interpersonal relations are complicated in China, so life can be exhausting. So just based on those three examples, as you can see, those posts or news articles have very different focuses. So now I'm going to use the big data analysis to show a more systematic picture of how the different inequality topics vary across these different types of media. So I'm using this latent directed allocation model, which has now already become a very standard model for analyzing its unsupervised machine learning method to analyze different topics from a corpus of documents. So overall, you can consider words as nested within documents, and then you can decompose this matrix into two matrices by introducing topics as a third latent dimension, so that you'll be able to see, well, how different words are nested within topics and how topics are nested within documents. And overall, the words will help us to identify the topics in each news media article. So I will just skip I think I don't have much time left, so I will skip the methods, but later I'm happy to come back to discuss the models if you have questions. But now for the rest of the time, I want to just show you my results. So the first is to just provide a very descriptive picture of changing our number of articles or our Weibo posts on inequality. So overall, you see in print media, we see a steady increase in the number of articles on inequality. And this also happens for the digital media, and in particularly after 2010, because some of the digital media didn't exist before 2010. And for our social media, our key opinion leaders for Weibo, it begins in 2009. And after 2013, we see this dramatic decrease in our Weibo posts on inequality. This is because there was a major crackdown of Weibo celebrities in 2013. So many big V's, their accounts were suspended or banned by the government. So first, I'll just run a very simple OLS regression to see whether there's different types of media as well as the media ownership is a predictor of the number of articles as well as the number of articles on inequality. So it's very interesting to see that digital media publish more articles than print media, and marketized or commercialized media publish more articles in general than state-owned media. So even after we control for the number of articles, we still see that digital media and marketized, particularly marketized media, they publish more articles on inequality news compared to more traditional media under stronger government control. So it's possible that some of the inequality news, they were being censored or self-censored in print media, particularly the state-owned print media. And then for the LDA analysis, so here I try to present the results. You will be able to see that I identified 9 most common topics, which I labeled as education, economic, politics, are related to domestic politics inequality and Western politics inequality, and rural-urban inequality, gender inequality, labor market inequality, and also in China, because of the inequality treaty between China and Japan and the US and the Soviet Union during the Qing government. So there are a lot of those inequality news about the 不平等条约, which were signed before the foundation of our PRC, but they are still included and considered as a separate category, as well as inequality between countries rather than within countries. Those are articles on inequality, say, between our developing countries and developed countries, and inequality caused by, say, our trade shocks or globalization and immigration. But overall, the most common topics, inequality topics, are related to education. So for those articles, they typically mention keywords such as student, schools, or university, technology, or college, teachers, etc. And also related to economic inequality when those articles discuss wealth or income or consumption or assets or industry. And another is related to our Western politics when articles discusses democracy, presidency, people or Europe or immigration. So those are inequality in other countries, but sometimes also comparing China with other countries, but not as an aggregated level, but in terms of, say, income inequality in China as compared to, say, in the US. And here are rural, urban, and gender. So I will skip this. Next is to show how these different topics of inequalities are likely being mentioned at the same time, because for one article, we may observe multiple topics being mentioned. Say, for example, we see this strong association here between the topic 1, education inequality, and topic 6, the gender inequality. Meaning that when articles discuss educational inequality, they are also likely to discuss how it's related to, say, male and female students, or how education affects our labor market outcomes by gender. And for economic inequality, when it is being mentioned, we are also likely to see topic 5, that's rural-urban inequality. Okay, so the next is I try to see, well, whether the most popular topics vary across these different types of media. So this shows some very striking results. The first is you see for state-owned print media. So rural-urban inequality accounts for almost 1/5 of all the articles on inequality. Whereas in more marketized print media, as well as our new digital media and social media, we see economic inequality. And certainly are the very popular topics. So my interpretation of this is that the government is very concerned about inequality, income inequality, or inequality at individual levels. It's more likely to attribute inequality to the structural factors such as rural-urban divide, or inequality between firms, or between regions, or between rural-urban areas, rather than between individuals, because they think that may create threats to political stability. Whereas in more marketized and new digital or the social media, people love to discuss income inequality and comparing China with other countries. And we also see this educational inequality. That's also a very popular topic, but it's not among the top 3 topics for state-owned print media. Okay, so that's for my first hypothesis. And the next is to test how people's media use behaviors affect their attitudes. So I pulled the data from 11 large-scale social surveys from the Asian Barometer Survey, the China's GSS, the CFPR, as well as this our internet user online survey. So for the last one, some of you, I assume for the first 3 panels, people are very familiar with them. But for the last one, it was collected by Renmin University. It's a repeated cross-sectional study. But in 2013, they adopted some questions that are the same as those in CFPS and CGSS that allow us to see whether these different surveys provide a consistent finding regarding our media use and people's perceptions. But these are targeting only the internet users, whereas for other surveys, they are nationally representative. Okay, so in all these surveys, they ask the questions very similar to this. They ask respondents, how severe do you think income or wealth inequality is in today's China? And people were asked to provide an answer. This is a very typical Likert type survey question. So people are then asked to pick a value. So based on this, we'll be able to evaluate whether they consider inequality in China is very severe or not severe. And then there are other questions related to their media use behaviors. For example, they ask our respondents, how often do you use, say, our press or digital or social media? And they also ask them, do you trust news in this media? So they will provide answers from, say, not at all to very much. So here I try to summarize our results in this graph. So this is a very busy graph because it contains a lot of information. So overall here are 3 types of media use questions or variables. So from media use frequency, and then main media.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. I don't see the slide, or rather the slide is in the previous slide. Can everyone see? Okay, this one. Okay, good, okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So this graph, so the y-axis shows 3 types of variables. Okay, for example, this is in 2006, a survey asked people, how frequent do you use internet? And some other questions ask, how frequent do you use newspapers? to obtain news about inequality. And there are also other questions about what is your main media source? Do you use internet? Do you use newspapers? And particularly, how often do you use them? And finally, there are questions about the level of media trust. Do you trust news in newspapers? Do you trust news from party press? Do you trust the news from foreign media or social media? Okay, so the results, okay, varies from are more equal, means that the coefficients from the models, if it's on the left of this zero, this threshold, means that people are likely to consider inequality in China as very low. So they think China is very equal. If the estimates is on the right, it's a positive number, means that people think inequality in China is very high. So it's a very unequal country, okay? So if it's blue, means that I hypothesize that it is unequal, whereas if it's on the left, it means are very equal. So give you an example. So people say they use newspaper a lot, okay? Then I hypothesize that this person would consider inequality as very low in China. Whereas for those internet users, I hypothesize that they tend to think our inequality is high in China. So some of these effects are not significant, but we can see some of those, particularly the media trust is a very strong predictor. For those who trust the newspapers and those who trust the party press, okay, so the coefficients are all statistically significant. That means for those people, they tend to think inequality is low in China compared to those who don't trust newspaper or don't trust the news in party press. By contrast, for those who trust the foreign media or those who trust the news from social media, they tend to view China as more unequal compared to those who don't use foreign media or who don't trust the foreign media or who don't trust the social media. So this is just association, but at least it shows this strong correlation between people's media use behaviors or their trust in different media and how it related to their perceptions of inequality in China. Okay, so I keep looking at time as I'm running out of time. So let me just very quickly to conclude the findings from this study. So firstly is news on inequality is a political sensitive topic and subject to political censorship in China. It's very clear that the Chinese government has strategically guided public perceptions of inequality through media coverage of inequality news. So many people, they are not tolerant of inequality. They are just ignorant of inequality. So because we see there is less news on inequality in state-owned media than in marketized or individualized social media. And even for news on inequality in state-owned media, it's very clear that news related to income inequality has been suppressed. Whereas for news on regional or firm or organizations or rural-urban inequality, seems that they are more overrepresented in state-owned media. And for this will very likely influence users, particularly state-owned media users, as they tend to underestimate the level of inequality compared to users of our digital media or social media. So I think there are a lot of implications, but here I want to highlight two implications. One is I think there are many topics now in China that show the evolving features of the social stratification of the state socialist economic system. And we need to use more creative data, not only for traditional survey data. Of course, traditional survey data are still the backbones of social science research, but there are now many other types of empirical evidence that can help us to better understand how social stratification has evolved in China in more recent years. Most of the studies on subjective inequality has focused on the US or on Europe. But for China or non-democratic countries, it has been largely understudied. And in this study, I try to show that the rising inequality as well as the subjective rising inequality, it's not an outcome of economic growth, or it's not necessarily product of economic growth. It's really a political decision. So our politicians and policymakers in China has chosen to disallow its growth, so which help to shape the landscape of subjective inequality that now we observe in contemporary China. So I will stop here now, and I would like to acknowledge the help from my research assistants who helped make this research possible. And I'm very happy to hear your thoughts or comments and suggestions.
Thank you very much, Prof. Song.
Should I stop share or
I think you can leave the slides on.
Okay, sure.
So yeah, we already have one question here. Mutsun, you want to post the question to see?
I want to see how I can see.
So Vincent have to type in the questions?
No. Just post the question.
I mean, I can ask directly.
Just ask the
right?
question.
Okay. Thank you, Sia, for sharing such exciting findings. And so basically, I have like 3 related questions. And so first of all, I think the final graph showing the associations between like medium use and trust and these perceptions of inequalities is intriguing. Is like very interesting. And so it seems that definitely the use and also the trust of media has been such an important shaping and reinforcing mechanism of the perceptions of inequality. And so I'm curious about the profiles, demographic, socioeconomic profiles, how different individuals are differently selected in use and in their trust of those different platforms. And also related to that is seeing that there is a major divergence, right, regarding the actual use frequency and this trust, right? And so it seems that there are so narrow variations, like insignificant results regarding the actual use, but like actually trust this media is like matters much more. And so I would want to hear about your thoughts on that divergence. And also, like currently you have already covered like a wide array of social media, of media use. And so I think like this related back to the profile question. And so some of the individuals, for example, those very young people or well-educated individuals, they may also largely rely on like a foreign source information media. And so so those sources of information, to what extent can be accurately reflected in the data, that may result in like a very different associations, right? And so I want to like hear about your thoughts on this use of foreign source information. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Well, yeah, so this actually, the results are from models that control for many other covariates. including people's education, their occupation, their party membership, our gender, etc. So overall, we see that party members, they underestimate the level of inequality compared to non-party members. And a highly educated group, they would overestimate it compared to the low educated group. And people in urban areas, they also are overestimated compared to those from rural areas. So we suspect that for people who live in urban residents, they probably are exposed to both people who are very rich and very poor, whereas for those who live in remote rural areas, so they probably live in those smaller communities that's more equal. So they just generalize their own life experience to the whole country. And in fact, here's a media use frequency. Most of the coefficients are not significant.
Right.
So I suspect that that means many people, they read newspapers, they read internet news, but they just don't trust those news. Whereas what really matters is people's trust. That is a better or stronger proxy of their behaviors and how it's translated into their perception. So how the media news. So people, I assume they will absorb a lot of information, but only for those information that they trust that will shape their perceptions.
Okay, thank you. Husu has a question.
Yes. My first question is about slide 25th, the 25th of the slide. So you have shown the different types of social media and the top news, top categories. I think for the state, this one. For state-owned, there's a so for state-owned print media, you have a political inequality category. And then for social media, there's also a political inequality category. But in the previous slide, I remember you have two types of political, one is focused on domestic, and the other is like Western kind of political inequality. So I wonder if these two are the same, or one is more towards domestic, the other is more towards Western China comparison. So that's a clarification question. My other question is kind of related to Mu Zheng's earlier question about the profile, the divergence. So you have already talked about the effect of education, urban, rural, and party membership. I'm wondering about the effect of work unit. So whether this is more about their access to institutional protection and benefits, whether those who are affiliated with the state sector, they underestimate inequality, and those who are outside the state sector will have or more accurate or maybe overestimate the degree of inequality. And the other question is about the period. Whether there's any differences across time. So in the survey data sets you have used, it ranges from the mid-2000s until quite recently, the late 2010s. And we know that China has tightened its control over all kinds of media over the years. Especially in the past decade. So I'm wondering if you have discovered any, whether the coefficients kind of change across time due to these very tight censorship and control in terms of expression, speech, and recent years, so many influential opinion leaders, their social media accounts are like closed, or they are basically deprived of the space to talk about social issues. And then there's crackdown on all kinds of civil organizations, feminist movements, these kind of things. Yeah. So whether this time effect on different types of inequality and perception of those themed inequality. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. Well, so regarding your first question, I have another graph that's not included there that I separated the Chinese and Western political inequality. But overall, for state-owned print media, most of the discussions on political inequality focus on China. So they try to argue that the party's core value is equity and justice. So it's not really about inequality, it's about equality. Whereas for social media, it's more polarized. So we see the government now use it as the propaganda apparatus. So there are many of those pro-government commentators who post a lot about the China's how the political regime is superior to other countries. But there are also people who are very liberal who post a lot of news about, compared to US and other countries, China is more unequal. And for your second question is regarding the work unit. Yes, your hypothesis is true that for people who work in state-owned work unit, they tend to think current inequality in China is low. And also there is less increase in inequality over the last few decades, whereas for those who work for commercial companies, they tend to think inequality is high. And regarding the last one, the time trend, surprisingly for this one, we didn't see any time trend. But I'm happy to, I don't know what will probably happen after 2018, but given that there are a lot of also changes since our Trump administration and more recent years during Xi's administration. So there may be some changes for more recent years that's not included in our database.
Okay, thank you. Can I have Andrew, in the interest of time, because we just have 5 minutes left, I will request the questioners to pose their question, and then we take all the questions first and then see we'll respond to all of them if that's okay. So Andrew first, followed by Daniel, and then Jiwei. Andrew?
I'll have two quick questions. Thank you so much for the talk, Xi. One is about sorting. Can the results be explained by sorting? So for example, Fox News does affect people's opinions about things, maybe makes them more conservative, but conservatives are attracted to Fox News. So there's a self-selection into the media types. So to what extent is it self-selection in this study, and to what degree is the media affecting their opinions? The second question is about I'm confused how you know people are underestimating inequality. First of all, there's many different measures of inequality. So it's not that China is more unequal in every single way by every single measure. And surely the state media is picking and choosing ones that makes China look better. And I thought the questions, especially from CFPS, was about whether inequality was a problem. And I imagine that some people might recognize there is inequality, but don't think it's a problem. So those are my questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Daniel, you want to pose your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, actually, my main question was the same one that was just asked, the first question. And if we could turn really quick to slide 28. Some of you may be aware we have an election coming up in the United States next week. And I was kind of fascinated, 28, the next one, the one with the red and the blue.
Oh. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I was just curious, people do tend to shuck themselves out into different news sources based upon their pre-existing beliefs, their ideologies. And I was very interested in this one, and I'm kind of wondering, do you have the same kind of shucking out in China that you have in the United States? And I just noticed the same kind of red versus blue here. We talk about red states and blue states in the United States. So it's just a little bit of a coincidence here. So what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Jiwei?
Hi, I just have a clarification problem. So can you distinguish those digital media from state media completely? Because many state-owned outlets, they also have digital subsidiaries. Xinhua News Agency, they also have this Weibo, also have these Weixin's public accounts. So can you do this? Probably if you can distinguish those states operating digital media from those private operating digital media, probably this conclusion will be a little bit different. Thank you.
Yeah, well, so let me just very quickly answer this question. So first, yes, there is a very large literature, particularly from economics. People try to argue that because of supply and the demand side, that determines how people choose different media, right? So it's not only the media influence people, but media also cater to their readers' interests. So this may go both ways. For those who tend to think that inequality is high, they would prefer to read, our foreign media or our social media who share similar views with them. So because of the cross-sectional nature of most of this data, I was not able to test it. But for CFPS, because it's longitudinal, I have some supplementary analysis. I try to see for those who changed their media use behaviors, whether that also they also change their perceptions, assuming that, when they are more exposed, particularly to internet, whether they will change their perceptions. And another question is, I try to think of what is Andrew's question. Another one I also think is very good.
You can skip it, just go to the other.
Oh, okay. So regarding how I define the state and the marketized one. So for marketized newspapers, the government still own a very large share of those newspapers. So the private share cannot exceed 49%, whereas for state-owned, they need to be 100% state-owned. So I used they have a supervising work unit, so 主管单位, and our sponsoring work unit, so 主办单位. I use the 主办单位 to define whether it's state-owned or whether it's marketized. If the 主办单位 is a government agency, then it's state-owned, otherwise it's marketized. But I think there are no news media in China that is 100% commercialized. And I think another question about what will happen in the US, right? I don't know, but I think people who read New York Times compared to those who read Fox News or, who watch CBS will be very different. So it will be, there are a lot of research on the US already. So I think it's less, I would not say it's more like a state control. So you probably will use it's more conservative or it's more liberal to define those different types of media. But I think in China, so I will use the degree of state control. I think it's more relevant to the Chinese context. I don't know if I missed any questions.
Jiwei?
Yeah, I don't know if I missed any questions, but I feel like I'm really in a rush.
It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I thought maybe if you allow me to just ask a very quick question, and then we just close this, I was very interested actually in slide 25, where you see here that regardless of the media, whether it's print or marketized or digital and so on, that they all talk about inequality. The only difference is that they talk about different kinds of inequality. So I suppose my question is, you know, do we have a theory that sort of explain, you know, why is it that different kind of media tend to focus on different kinds of inequality? And I just pose a very quick example. If you look at the state-owned print, they never talk about educational inequality. And I suspect it might be because, you know, in the Chinese system, the national examinations, Gaokao, is a very treasured and esteemed meritocratic institution. And so the state media will never be in a position or want to find itself in a position to interrogate educational inequality, because this is the very foundation upon which Chinese society stands. And of course, parents and students alike treat the Gaokao system very seriously, right? So I think do you have any thoughts about, you know, why is it that different kinds of media will tend to focus on different kinds of inequality, but they all talk about inequality, but in a different way? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I would say probably some topics inequality topics are more sensitive than others, and particularly income inequality. I think educational inequality is also sensitive because the government doesn't want the public to challenge the legitimacy of the current educational system.
Yeah.
And for income, I know for our sociological publications in China, so for just the academic papers, you cannot use our income inequality as the keyword. So for example, like our Chinese social science, what is called 中国社会科学, that's probably the top sociological journal. So there is this hidden rule that you cannot use that. For those, I think it's related to the government performance. So they think those are more sensitive. So many of those articles, they are being self-censored. And for other types of, well, for more commercialized media, of course, the public like to read those. Those are people are really concerned, right? They are less concerned about regional or about a political inequality. They are more concerned about things related to their everyday life, like education or income or labor market, you know, those things. So I think it's the joint outcome of multiple mechanisms. It's hard to say a single one that helps to explain the results.
Thank you very much, C. Thanks to everyone who attended this talk. Very interesting results, as well as very interesting methods and data. Really appreciate. Thank you for spending the evening with us. So for those in Singapore, good morning. And of course, on your side, C, have a good evening ahead. Thank you very much, everyone. See you soon.
Thanks for being here today. I really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Thank you.